In our history book, remember we were talking about the Sioux Indian tribe. Remember they lived right in the center part of the United States in the Great Plains. And we said the reason they were called plains is because there were there were some rolling hills, but not any tall mountains and no oceans. It was just plain land. Again, rolled on forever and ever. It's kind of in the area of Kansas, Nebraska, right in that area. So we learned that the Indians that lived in this tribe they were involved heavily with the buffalo, and the buffalo was their everything. There were millions of buffalo that lived in that area, and because the buffalo liked it too, it was nice and warm. It was warm spots. It was flat. There was this little meandering Platte River that ran through, and the buffaloes could drink and graze. And there was because there was so much kind of this river that went everywhere. There's lots and lots of grasses for the buffalo to eat. And you can see there's a herd of them there on page 37. So the buffalo was everything. They ate it every which way you could think of. They roasted it, they boiled it, whatever they could do. They didn't eat it raw, but they did everything else. They cut it into strips, they dried it. But one of the things that they made was pemmican, and they would take the buffalo fat, the buffalo meat, and they'd pound it up into a smashy mess, and they'd add some cherry juice to it to give a little extra flavor, and they'd pat it out and they put it in the sunshine to dry, and they called it pemmican, and you need to know that word. The buffalo were an animal that stampeded, and so they stayed close to the buffalo, but they weren't just in their camp, not like the cowboys and the cows. They also stampede, but the cowboys took care of the cows, and the cows were not necessarily as wild as a buffalo. So they followed the buffalo, but they followed kind of from a distance. But when the buffalo moved, the Sioux Indians had to move too. And so they made houses that were movable, whereas the Cherokees' houses were not movable. And the Chippewa, they didn't hardly even have houses. But these people had houses because it was cool there. It was cold out on the plains of Nebraska. And so they made their houses out of buffalo, and they decorated their houses, but their houses were totally movable. And they would move them. Lots of times they would use wild dogs, which were kind of part wolf, part dog, to drag their house with them. And they'd lay stuff together and drag it from maybe 50 miles up the road or up the way. We didn't have roads. But they would drag it for a while, and then where the buffalo stopped, and they felt that the buffalo were going to stay there, then they'd set up camp again. And so they were constantly on the move, kind of like the children of Israel in the wilderness. They're constantly on the move. So they lived in tents, and these people lived in teepees. The buffalo the parts of it were used for absolutely everything. They ate everything they possibly could. They dried what they couldn't eat because, of course, they had no refrigerators, so there was no way to keep it really long. And a buffalo is a very big animal. It can feed a lot of people for a lot of days. And so they didn't waste it. They used every part of that buffalo. There was certain parts of the buffalo that were tougher on the inside. Some of those were tendons and pieces of muscle, the intestines. All of those things have tenacity. That means they've got some strength. And so they could use those for ropes. They could use those for string, like we would commonly use string, or maybe even Scotch tape. They would use those sinews, those tougher parts of the buffalo. They'd use his horns. They would use his bones for making any kind of spoons, knives, forks, whatever, scraping instruments. They would use they would use his fur to make rope, and they could twist it. Buffalo's fur his fur is probably 6 inches long anyway, in certain parts of him, and they could twist that and make a rope out of that. So the buffalo to them was their life, and they needed him. And there were no other big animals. Remember that? There weren't any deer, elk, or moose. Not even anything as big as a beaver. They didn't really have those animals. They had just maybe a few small animals, but they needed the buffalo. So they followed the buffalo wherever he went. We also learned that this tribe was a tribe that was known for sign language. They made signs from one tribe to the next tribe that wasn't a Sioux. Maybe maybe they would find another peaceful tribe there, and they would have a sign language. They just make signs with their hands, and it kind of became known that certain signs meant this, like if you're walking, okay? So they understood, the tribes understood what the sign language meant. And then we learned that the chief wore a war bonnet and that he got feathers for every brave act that he did. And sometimes his feathers were very extreme, and they would go clear down on the ground because he had done so many brave things. So that's what you need to know for this tribe. Be sure you have read pages 37, 38, 39 and watch the first couple of videos. And then you're going to go ahead today and take your Sioux Indian quiz. Okay, that's all for now. Bye-bye.